taking on the Homeowners Association president, posted by GFT RGC. This happened when my wife and I first got married. My grandfather had passed just a couple months before and left me a very sizable inheritance with a note to make sure that I use it smartly to start a good life for my wife and I. My father-in-law owns a real estate company that buys foreclosed houses and rehabs them, and he knew of a great starter home for my wife and I, and agreed to pay to have it rehabbed with the understanding that we would pay him back when we were better established, or after 2 years when we sold the house. So we bought the house, and it took about 90 days to rehab it before we moved in. This is an important fact later on. So we finally moved into our house and had been there for about 2 weeks when someone came and knocked on our door, stating that they were the Homeowners Association president and asked for my landlord's contact information. I explained that we didn't rent the home and that we were the owners, and then they followed that up by asking to speak with my parents. I reiterated again that I was the homeowner and asked them what they wanted. They explained that there was a HOA for the neighborhood and that I needed to sign the HOA rules, and I owed $90 prorated for my dues, but they would give me 30 days to pay as a courtesy. However, they needed me to sign the rules right then. I told them that I wanted to read and review them first before I agreed to sign anything, and they were extremely pushy about signing them right then. I refused, and they told me that I had 7 days to sign them and explained that they have legal power to fine me if I do not turn in a signed copy in that time. I called my in-laws because I didn't know anything about HOAs, and I asked them for their advice. My father-in-law got ticked, saying that it should have been disclosed prior to the sale, but sometimes with HUD houses that gets missed. So we agreed that the $30 a month fee wasn't horrible, especially because they did provide a really nice playground for the neighborhood. So I agreed and signed the rules, and there were a couple that seemed a little over the top to me, but I agreed anyway because from my understanding at the time, I really didn't have any choice. It seemed fine enough until about a month passed, and we had a small housewarming party with a couple of friends. Literally, there were less than 8 people there, including my wife and I. The house was small, but it had a nice deck, so we were out back having a small fire using a fire pit that one of our friends had just given us, when I heard someone knocking at the door. No, pounding like a freaking cop. I just went around the house, and there was the HOA president with his car in front of my house with a yellow police light on top. Yes, I am serious. I asked how I could help him, and he very sternly told me that I was in violation of the HOA rules by throwing a party outside of approved hours with a 10 p.m. curfew, and that I needed to send my friends home or quietly take it inside. I checked my watch, and it was 10:05 p.m. I was amazed, but we took it inside regardless. The next day, the very next day, I had a letter from the HOA stating that it was my official warning for violation of the HOA rules by throwing a, and I quote, wild bonfire that was a safety hazard while drinking, and I literally hadn't drank at all. Whatever, I brushed it off and figured it was no big deal. Flash forward 6 to 9 months. We were hosting a teen group devotional for our church one afternoon, and we were playing a game of football in the street. We lived on a connecting street that got virtually no traffic and only had 2 houses on it, ours and the family across from us, whose kids were also playing in the game. All of a sudden, I hear a police siren and see the yellow light flashing. The HOA president gets out and tells us that we have to break it up immediately as it's a safety hazard because one of the kids could get run over. I was fed up with him and told him that they were fine and that we've been watching for cars and that he was literally the first car that we've seen and we had been playing for over an hour at that point. He insisted and asked what would happen if an ambulance or a police officer needed to come down that street to save someone's life. This was stupid because literally both streets we were connected to have entrances from the main road. I gave in and we went inside. The next day, I get a letter explaining that I was being fined $60, the maximum fine allowed for a first offense, and that if I wanted to protest it, I could attend the next HOA meeting. I decided I want to protest the fine, but noticed that the fine was due in 30 days, and the next HOA meeting wasn't for 35 days. I opted not to pay until after the hearing and wrote a letter back to the HOA president stating as such. I go to the meeting, and it's literally myself, the HOA president, the HOA secretary, which is the president's wife, the vice president, which is his neighbor, and the treasurer, which is the vice president's wife. My protest was immediately overruled, and I was also charged a $30 late fee for not paying on time, despite notifying him. I was fed up. I couldn't take it any longer, but I realized I really didn't have any recourse. About 4 to 5 months later, we gave birth to our first child, and about a month after that, I was driving home one night. I was working a second job in retail at the time, and my buddy in the military called me. He had been deployed when my daughter was born and was calling to congratulate me. When I got home, I didn't want to risk waking up my sleeping newborn daughter, so I just sat in my car with the engine running as it was a little chilly outside. I sat there for about a half an hour when I heard the police siren and saw the yellow lights. Now, keep in mind, police sirens aren't quiet, and this was right in front of my house. His stupid yellow light was flashing everywhere, including into my daughter's bedroom. I got out of the car and rather rudely told him to turn off the light as to not wake my daughter. He explained that I looked suspicious sitting in my car with it running outside of my house. And I explained the situation, and he told me I had to go inside and that my history of being a troublemaker wouldn't grant me any leniency. I basically told him where I thought he could go and proceeded to sit on the hood of my car. He sat there for another 15 minutes, telling me I needed to go in, and at one point touched my shoulder. I explained to him that if he touched me again, I would take it as a sign of aggression and defend myself, which he responded by getting in his car and leaving. He circled the block about 4 times the next 30 minutes, which was when I got too cold to stay out and finally went inside. The next day, I get a hand-delivered letter from him and the vice president, and he also asked me to step outside to talk about last night's incident. He explains that he was being nice by not calling the police on me after I threatened him, at which point I cut him off and told him that he needed to get off of my property before I called the police on him for trespassing. I read the letter and saw that he was giving me 2 different fines for $180 each, which were the maximum amounts. One for violating curfew and one for disobeying the night watchman. I was done. I had reached my breaking point. This is where the revenge comes in. I start looking into HOA laws and regulations regarding fines and how to protest them because I felt like this was clearly abuse. I find that the law states that you must be notified of an HOA 10 days prior to closing on a house and must be served with the HOA rules within 45 days of purchase, or you are not subject to being forced to participate in the HOA. I remember that we weren't served until after we moved in, which was close to 90 days after we closed. So I called my real estate agent, who is a very close family friend. My in-laws have bought literally thousands of houses from her over the past 35 years, and asked if she had the paperwork still, and she said that she can get me a copy. I looked, and it was over 90 days after purchase that we were notified, and there was no disclosure statement at closing. The realtor says that she must have misplaced it because it's required by law to be provided prior to the sale, and basically that she wouldn't miss something like that because it comes to her when they do a title inspect on the house, whether or not there's a registered HOA. She does a little digging and calls me back 2 days later and says that the neighborhood doesn't have an HOA registered with the city or county, which is required. I end up calling the county office in charge of registering and give them the neighborhood name, and she says that our neighborhood is registered in the other city and not in our city, and that if we wanted to start an HOA, we would have to follow these certain steps, and that without those, the HOA wouldn't be allowed to collect any money or have any authority. Apparently, what had happened was our neighborhood was originally all in one city, but when the city lines changed, the neighborhood was split in half. The other neighborhood kept the HOA that was registered, and our HOA president was supposed to register with the state, but didn't feel like jumping through all the hoops that it required. I was ready to walk down to the president's house and rip it into him, but I decided to be smart for a minute. I talked to my neighbor across the street, who also hated the HOA, and told him what I'd found out. He was furious about it as well. We talked to a few more, and we got a group of about 10 of us together that agree that we need to show up at the next HOA meeting, and word had apparently spread, because there ended up being more people than the library meeting room could host. I had specifically asked to be the speaker for the group, which they were nice enough to let me do. The president tried to prevent me from speaking due to being overdue on my fines, which at this point I'm about 3 weeks late on my last set of fines, with a $30 a week penalty on each fine, so my current bill is set to be about $540. But hey, I spoke anyway. I explained to them that I had contacted my in-law's attorney, also a family friend, who had drafted together a lawsuit regarding the fact that they were impersonating a registered HOA in order to collect money from us, which was fraud. The president dismissed me and said I had no idea what I was talking about and that he had enough of my antics. The staff members all left immediately while the rest of us stayed and talked. A month later, we were served them formally, myself and 20 other homeowners, suing them for all the fines and the HOA dues that we had paid, to the tune of approximately $50,000, as some of these families had been there over 10 years. The president and vice president got their own attorney who attempted to legitimize the HOA, but it required the signature of like 90% of the homeowners. They got 3 signatures, including 2 of themselves, and some other old bitter hack had signed as well. After that failed, they tried to settle by agreeing to abolish the HOA and showed that they hadn't financially gained from it and that all the funds had been used for the park upkeep, the snow removal, and other neighborhood events. We took a vote, and this was turned down in overwhelming fashion. I was surprised I actually voted to accept this. Then about a week later, one of the other families calls and mentions something about the park maintenance and snow removal. Apparently, he had given a quote to do the landscaping for the park, like cutting the grass and mulching and so on, and his quote had been a couple $100 cheaper than what they were paying, and that it had always bothered him because the person that did these jobs was the vice president's son, and that what they were paying him was pretty outrageous in terms of what's standard. Eventually, it went to court, where the judge looked at everything and mandated that they pay $21,000, $1,000 per homeowner, plus attorney and court fees, which were like another $2,000, for a total of $23,000 in damages. Additionally, they were fined by the city's governing body after it was reported. I don't know how much that fine was, though. We ended up selling the house that following summer, but I talked to a couple friends that still lived there about a year after, and they had said that the president and vice president both sold their houses and moved away because they were pretty much hated by everyone in the neighborhood, and that they had an informal HOA that people donated to for upkeep of the park. Oh man, this HOA president is literally committing fraud for over a decade now. For those 10 years, people were paying this guy money for the HOA that never actually existed. And people thought it did because the town was one town and it split into 2, and the new part never got, oh my goodness. This is literal $50,000 suing, $20,000 payout worth of fraud. The HOA guy moves out. He's completely deleted from his own pretend fake HOA with this fraud accusation, which is true, and then OP, because he was brave enough to look into it deeper and didn't just take no for an answer from this bully of an HOA president, he came out on top and saved the entire neighborhood. Way to go, OP. What do you think? I reported my former landlord to the IRS for tax fraud as revenge for him making up lies on me to keep my deposit. He had to file for bankruptcy and lost his condo. Posted by Extremely Tired of HR. I'm so glad he lost his freaking house. I found this guy on Craigslist a few years ago. I like renting condos from private owners as opposed to renting apartments. Typically, by renting a condo, it's safer. You have more caring residents, and you get to have a luxury apartment-style home with all the amenities, and you can negotiate pricing and so on. I am an excellent tenant, and anyone who I have rented from will tell you that. I paid a $1,000 deposit to move into this guy's condo, and I was on a year lease. He lives in another state, but we were on the same time zone. On month 8 of my lease, I came home to a door that wouldn't open. I couldn't get the door unlocked for crap. I had 2 keys on me, and as much as I tried to turn them, I couldn't. One of the keys even broke in the lock. I waited 2 hours. I called and texted and emailed my landlord, and he did not pick up. I thought maybe he had someone to change the locks for some reason. I honestly didn't know what to think and had no one to help me. The lady who lived across from me saw me in distress as she was going into her apartment. I had never seen her, but she asked me if I were okay, and I explained to her that I couldn't get into the apartment. She told me that she knows of an on-call locksmith, and she gives me his number. I tell her thanks and reach out to my landlord a few more times. No response. I had no choice but to call the locksmith, plus I had to pee like crazy. The locksmith arrives and could not get the door unlocked with my key. He says he can replace the lock for like $100, and I told him I was renting a condo and couldn't get in touch with the owner and didn't know when would be the next time I could get in touch with him. After he took the lock off, he told me it was faulty. So he replaced the lock. I told the landlord this via email and text and voicemail and told him that I could send him copies of the keys if he wanted. Okay, so fast forward to the end of my lease. I demand that he does a walkthrough with me, and he said he wouldn't. I told him that if he didn't do a walkthrough, I would be notifying the condo office, as he did not have permission to sublease by the association. He then had a friend to serve as his proxy to come meet me and walk through the unit. The place was spotless. I know how to clean. I took multiple photos and videos and showed his proxy, who is a police officer, the unit. Actually, they are both police officers who used to work together. We both literally tested all the appliances, faucets, checked the blinds, carpets, hardwood, everything. His proxy gave me the okay and said that everything looked great. I give his proxy the keys and later that night left for my new city. So fast forward to a month later. I haven't heard from him about my deposit. He ignored all my emails and phone calls. He finally gets back with me 2 months after I moved out and has all this ridiculous made-up crap about how I damaged his unit. Broken blinds, scratches on the hardwood floor. He made it seem like I damaged his door by getting the lock replaced. He even said that there were scratches on the outside of his door, rust here and there, broken dishwasher, sink, and oven, broken dryer, just all these lies. I would never leave a unit in that condition. He sent me an itemized list of all the charges that magically came out to be $1,000, the same as my deposit. He was always planning to keep my money. He wanted that money to either ball on it or upgrade his condo, and I hated him. I decided I wasn't going to go to court because I had moved to a different state and I live alone, but I thought of something. He rented to me under the table and likely didn't claim my rent payments as earned income. I had all my wire transfers on my bank statement. I had his routing and account number and a copy of his driver's license as we agreed to swap IDs when I signed the lease to make sure that I wasn't getting scammed. I found his out-of-state address online, gathered all my bank statements, gathered his bank account numbers, and made a report with the IRS. About a few years later, I check up on things, and that jerk lost his condo and lost everything he owned in bankruptcy. I paid for and downloaded his court records and saw proof that he lost everything, including his condo and cars, and had his bank accounts seized. I'm not sure if he's went to jail or anything, but I'm so glad that jerk got his freaking karma. He stole money from me that I gave him to rent a condo, and he ends up losing that same condo to bankruptcy. Screw him and anyone who calls him a friend. He can rot for all I care. Now this comment here gives the truth and says, I wouldn't be surprised if your tip-off uncovered something much larger and more systematic. It tends to work out that way. See, this guy thinks he can be a scammer, that OP's going to move out of state somewhere, not really think of this, oh, $1,000 bill, darn, I better pay it. You know, most people, they might be ran over and say, oh, you know, I can't say no, he's my landlord, I'm just trying to get out of here, I don't want any trouble, I don't feel like dealing with this. So they just pony up the grand, not even considering that it's related to their deposit and is a scheme to keep it. Yeah, this landlord, he tried to take advantage of him moving out of state, not wanting to deal with it. But you know what? OP came back strong and knew what to do. Didn't just say, no, I'm not paying it, but escalated things to nuclear revenge levels. Let me know what you think. Wow, OP, wild story. I sued the HOA president for stealing my truck and destroying it, and I'm not even part of the HOA. Click the video on your screen, you don't want to miss this insane fallout, and I'll see you there.